transdisciplinary sex researcher and educator. Her current research delves into sex worker art forms in India and Egypt. Her broader research investigates how culture and politics influence the evolution of human social and sexual attitudes, perceptions, behaviors, and artistic expressions in post-colonial societies. She hails from an academic background in neuroscience, MS, biotechnology, BE. Nishita is also the first Indian to become an AASECT Certified Sex Educator, CSE. That's a lot of acronyms. Please welcome to the stage, Nishita.
Hello. Thank you for all of you for being here, and I hope you're enjoying the Hips Do Lie drinks. Okay, welcome. So this has been my project for about 2.5 years now. Finally wrote a paper, but I will give you the QR code for a free reading link if you'd like that. Okay. When you think of belly dance and when you think of Oriental, these are the pictures, these are the depictions that you generally would see. But what if I tell you none of this is belly dance? So what is in this name? What do we call belly dance? So the earliest depiction of belly dance comes from French literature, danse de ventre. Danse de ventre generally means moving your belly, so hence belly dance. But the belly dance word did not end up in English until 1883. The French decided to put it up there in 1864, as you can see with Jean-Léon Gérome's picture of Danse de Almeja, and he called it Danse de ventre. So what is belly dance? These are the definitions that we have. From Oxford Dictionary, we have dance that originated in the Middle East, typically involving a woman undulating movements of her hips and her belly. And from Cambridge, we have performing variety of dance typical to Western Asia, a woman moving her hips and stomach. We have dictionary.com, a solo dance of the Middle Eastern origin, performed by a woman, midriff exposed, movements of the pelvis, movements of abdominal muscles, a sensuous, provocative dance of Middle Eastern origin performed by women with undulating movements of the hips and abdomen. And you see a lot of the commonalities across these definitions. But what about the hand gestures? What about the chest undulations? What about the gazillion amount of chest shimmies that we see in belly dance? Let's look at the English timeline. So in English, we have Danse de ventre from 1872, which got translated into 1883 of the book called Land of the Lion and the Sun, or Modern Persia, and I could not find the 1883 edition. The only edition I could find was the 1891 edition, and this was the excerpt that we have over here. So I put that into generative AI, and this is the image we got. And mind you, this was a man who traveled to Persia, who found someone dancing with a white turban on, which was so large that it almost covered his whole head. And he decided to paint a large face on his abdomen, and he called the face to look seemingly like the moon. And he called that belly dance, because the movements that he was making with the belly at that point. This is the original, I would say, earliest version of belly dance in English. But belly dance predates that. We have a rich history of the so-called dance that we call as belly dance. But what did the people of Egypt, where this dance originated from, call it? Well, belly dance does not exist. There is no word for belly dance in Arabic or in any African language. What we do have is approximately around 30 plus folk dances that have been documented by dance ethnographers and dance anthropologists across Egypt and Sudan, and I'm concentrating specifically in Egypt today, that during colonial periods, they decided to club it under the category of belly dance. Even though these dance forms had nothing to do with the women dancing, nothing to do with the midriff exposed, nothing to do with undulations, nothing to do with hip gyrations. They were still called belly dance. So let's look at these folk dances that existed. And this is kudos to our ethnographer, Tamir Aziz from Egypt, who has categorized every single one of these dance forms. From Masa Matruha in west of Egypt, we have Hagala. From Alexandria, we have Alexandrian and Melaya Leff. From Port Said Ismail Suez, we have Henna, Semsemiya, and Bambotiya. Now, there is something interesting about this. When we talk about Egypt and its nation-building activities, which started around 1880s, you had this thing called as invention of traditions, which is not unique to Egypt. It happens with every single nation-building activity that you see. What is a national identity? It comprises of invented traditions, not traditions that are local to the land, invented traditions that cause you to feel a belonging with this nationality that is newly found and developing. So around the 1880s and closer to 1900s as well, we had a lot of these dance competitions going around across the world, I would say. And every single nation, including the US, mind you, was involved in this nation building activities. So they would project a version of US using dance on the world stage, so that the rest of the people out there would know that US is full of culture and is very strong, has a rich history, and they will not attack us again. So we have the same thing occurring even in Russia. So US and Russia were, well, they were locking heads, I would say. Now, Egypt was conquered. Egypt was under colonialism at that point. All the dance forms were already relegated to the margins by calling it promiscuous, by calling it a sex worker dance form. So they were uncomfortable with this idea of projecting the dance form as belly dance. So what did they do? They invited the Moishev Dance Company, which are, I would say, think of folk dances in Russia that was being utilized and staged. So you are talking about a cleaned out version of a folk dance that will finally end up on the stage. So what you see on the stage is heavily crafted, it is heavily dictated upon, every single movement is being choreographed, it is no longer a folk dance. It may have elements of the folk dance, it may have the sound of a folk dance, it may not be the folk dance. It has been staged for a particular reason. Why? Because the state approves of the dance form. That is the only reason such dance forms go onto the stage. So, what did Egypt do? Egypt invited the Moishev Dance Company, which is a Russian-based company, to come over and craft a whole new folk dance in Egypt called Bambotiya. And it was crafted based on Russian farmer dance forms. So you will still see the same spoons being used. However, in Egypt you had steel spoons because, well, wooden is expensive. So we had steel spoons in Egypt that was used for Bambotiya, and it had the Egyptian flavor to it. You know, you add a little bit of clothing here and there, you add a little bit of color here and there, a few beats of the Debka, and there you go. You can call it Egyptian folk dance. And hence, it got categorized as an Egyptian folk dance here, even in this category too. But was it really a folk dance? No. It was invented in the 19th century, and the reason behind it is because Egypt wanted to portray a rich cultural history not built on sex worker art forms that was categorized as sex worker art forms. So, Port Said sections, we had Semsemiya and Bambotiya. Semsemiya is very similar to Bambotiya, the only difference being that sailors were the ones who were performing Semsemiya. They would use a kerchief and wave you goodbye. It was both sides. It was a sailing port. So in the Sinai Peninsula, when we go to the Sinai Peninsula, we have 3 sections with Dahia, Mashreqiya, and Debka. In the Delta region, we have Fallahi, Ghawazee, and Gypsy. By the way, what I'm wearing today is inspired by Ghawazee dancers. The top here is representative of N3 dancers, N3 outfits that was worn by Ghawazee dancers. They would wear these tops and they would cut it out. And when the Englishmen arrived, they were horrified with the women roaming around with the breasts all open for everybody to see. Later on, it became a thing that, oh, you gotta wear a blouse underneath. You cannot just roam around with your breasts out there. But it's hot in Egypt. Who wants to wear a blouse? Right? We have Baladi and Awalem and Oriental dance forms in Cairo. And yes, Oriental is very different from belly dance. We also have in the Upper Egypt, Saidi, Ghawazee, Gypsy, and the Tahtieb game, which is played by sports. So if you see belly dancers use sports, there's a lot of resemblance to the Tahtieb game and to Saidi dance forms as well. In the Western Desert, we have Bedouin, Kaffafa, Zagala, and Burmia Baharia. In the Eastern Desert, we have Bedouin and Kaffafa. In Nubian, we have 14 different types of Nubian dance forms. Now, mind you, the Nubian Desert was, well, not really up for the colonizer's taste, right? It's a desert, it's very hard to live there. But at the same time, they were conquered several times by the Egypt, and several people from the Nubian deserts were taken in as slaves. So eventually their dance forms just got relegated to the name stick dance. So we don't know what the names are. We know there are different types of dance forms. Maybe some community members may know the dance forms, but the language could be slightly different to converse with them. So we have 14 different dance forms. It is still under the process to decide what the names are. In Halab and Shadim, we have Whiplash and Hoseiet. So that was Egypt. Now, let's look into the conquest and modernity aspect of Egypt. You see, in post-colonial societies, we have this saying called, "It is modern to be modest." Now, I could be overgeneralizing that for obvious reasons right now, but I love that phrase because these are some of the quotes that we see around the 1800s of Orientalists traveling into Egypt and the kinds of things that they encountered, like, oh, the women's dancing was licentious. There is no entertainment between the two sexes. There's one, Gustave Flaubert, in 1853, who wrote, "She makes no distinction between one man and another man. She can sleep with anyone." Now, when we have these kind of written works coming in, the first group of people to get colonized, as we say, to have colonized minds, are the rich, are the upper class, are the bourgeoisie. If your bourgeoisie has a colonized mind, the products they might create in return, all the intellectual materials they might create in return, is still going to be informed by the colonized mind. And so, around 1830s, Muhammad Ali Pasha, the king at that time, banned these Ghawazee dancers that I just spoke about from the streets of Cairo. They were forced to travel all the way to Aswan and settle down. Now, these were dancers who would dance on the streets of Cairo. I mean, Cairo is a metropolitan city at that point. You cannot have those kind of dance forms in Aswan. You won't be able to survive there. And when he did that, around the same time point, we have a lot of these people like Al-Tawi who went all the way to France to learn what it means to be decent. What are these dances that are supposedly decent, and wrote a lot of things about the French dancers and the so-called Egyptian dancers making broad statements. And so, what happened when the dancers left Cairo? There was a market that was available. And who did fill that market? The Kavala dancers. These were men who would dress up as women, who would dress up as Ghawazee dancers, take to the streets and dance the same dance forms. The reason why we know so much about Kavala dancers is also because of, well, let's just say it is a lot of Orientalism and a lot of businesses built around travel. Why? Because we had people coming in talking about Hassan's performance possessed great artistry. And some other guy who goes by the name Gerard de Naval, I'm sorry to butcher the name, but I don't speak French. And I'm going to quote a few things out of his diary. And he says, the dancing girls appeared in a cloud of dust and tobacco smoke. Their forms seemed bare under the muslin between the little jacket and the loose girdle. Two of them seemed particularly beautiful, but the third had a week-year-old beard. And he took a long time to discover that all the dancing girls were in fact males, and was shocked. Oh my God, the sensibilities of the Englishmen. So, the Kavals and the Kavalats were all, well, they were legislated against. Very soon, the word Kaval and a Kavalat would become a code word for gay. It was a term in a very highly Islamic society, would become the word that would later on license individuals to kill people who were called Kawals and Kawalats. So it is still a very, very problematic term today, despite the long history that the Kawalat had held in the society. The fact that they were dancers for a long time, not just because the Ghawazee dancers left. They were already existing. You need to have a certain cultural knowledge to be able to just fill out those boxes. Now, you must all have known about the coin belt that is used in belly dance, right? Let's look at that. 60s and 70s, we see a version of the coin belt that we see even today with the metals being stitched into the belt. This is Bal Anath and Jamila Salimpur and the troupe. In 50s and 60s, we had this migration of people coming in from Armenia, from Lebanon, Turkey, and Egypt, all the way to the US. Well, because there were new casinos being built and dance clubs being built, and they needed people to come in and occupy those areas. By then, you also had this version of American cabaret being seeped into belly dance. So you see a lot of the outfits inspired by American cabaret over here. This is Helena Vlaus, the Greek dancer, and her dancers. We also have Aisha Ali in a coin costume from out there. In 40s and 50s was the golden era of Egyptian cinema. We have Samia Gamal, who would come in with a version of the coin belt, but more specifically coins being stitched into one's blouse. So 1950s and 1947, these are two images of Samia Gamal's movies that actually came out. 20s and 30s, known as the grandmother of belly dance, we have got Badia Masabni, who would wear the coins as a headscarf. Around the 1900s and 1910s now, this is where it gets interesting. We have Scheherazade coming out, we had the Pharaoh's daughter which came out, and we had Sofia Fedorova in most of the in most of these dance forms. So the earliest version of coin belt being used directly in dance as a belt was in Russian ballet. It was Ballet Rouge, and it was heavily inspired by Orientalist paintings. Specifically, the painting of the Austrian artist Hans Zagala in 1859 of the dancing tambourine girl, and the Shalom, the Jewish princess's Oriental fantasy by the French artist Francis Louis Mora in 1899. Why do I mention these two artists? Because before that, we did not have a coin belt. The coin belt is a pure Orientalist fantasy, which was first adopted, or rather dreamt of, by this Austrian artist, and later adapted by Ballet Rouge. And it was further on put into American cabaret, well, because it sells. So, what was the dance form before? In Middle Egypt, we have dances which featured some sort of a scarf with tassels that were tied around the necks. But there was no coins attached to it. So there must have been some area where that fantasy came from, right? You can't just dream that up. What do you mean by you've got to stitch the coins into fabric? Now that's a very specific thing. Where do you get that dream? Again, here are some more examples of how the scarves were tied around the waist. These are all Ghawazee dancers, and you can see different depictions of them. And this is another variation on the scarf by the Kengi Turkish dancers as well. This is where you get the fantasy. So before the Brits came into Egypt, the first wave of colonialism was by the French. The French entered the whole continent through Algeria. When French colonized Algeria, they encountered these lovely women called Nileyat dancers, or from the tribe Bilad Nile. Now, Bilad Nile dancers were a part of a matriarchal society. These were women who have traveled to certain parts of Algeria to make a livelihood for themselves. They may or may not go back to where they came from. They were Berber tribes, so they may or may not go back to the tribes that they actually came from to get married. In fact, there's a lot of confusion around this, because when the French interviewed them as to why are you dancing, why are you working, why are you holding money, why are you managing money on your own, where is the man here in this equation? They ended up concluding, well, it was for the dowry, perhaps. It wasn't. There was no dowry tradition amongst these tribes. There was no dowry. So a lot of people went and actually interviewed the Berber men. Are you comfortable with the fact that your women are out there dancing? They're out there earning money. They're out there managing a house. They're out there managing cafes, perhaps. They're in fact having sex with other men as well. Are you comfortable with that? And the men were like, well, they have experience. And they're happy. They're not going to leave us. They chose us. They're not forced into this lifestyle. When they decide to get married, they'll get married. So that was Bilad Nile women. Now, around the 7th or the 8th centuries is when we see that they started to convert to Islam. But they weren't the women who would wear the veil. They weren't kept women. They could choose to cover themselves if they wanted to, and they did decide to do that once colonialism began. Reason being that there were a lot of people out there who would take advantage of the fact that women had their own quarters and they were doing business on their own. So they would cover one eye with the veil by themselves. Now, if you were to go to these locations in Pausada, Shalala, and Biskra, you will still see a remnant of the dance du ventre that the French had encountered back then. you will still see a variation of that. And it is going to be in stark contrast to the belly dance that you know of today. It's not going to be the one that you have seen on the stage these days. Not to be concerned with the Azriat dancers, who were also from the same tribe. Azriat dancers were, let's say, living in a high altitude areas, so the French cars could not reach those spaces that much. So they weren't really colonized, but they wouldn't really get any equipment or any food or anything like that. Their connections to the village was almost cut off. In fact, during social reform movements, when the bourgeoisie class decided to take on colonial norms of gender and sexuality into picture, these women were also legislated against. They were subjected to reform movements, and that did not go well because all they knew was you need to dance. I am going to skip this, but you can read it. You know, the Moorish dance, it's insignificant and downright vulgar. So these are some comments of the French when they actually encountered the village Nile when they were traveling around. Let's come to the US. One of the major depictions of belly dance in the US was through the Midway Plaisance, which was a fair that was organized by, it's a World Columbia Festival, which was organized. We had like 3 versions of it, if I'm not wrong, yeah. And I managed to find this map. And this map goes into details of different kinds of villages that they were kind of setting up. You had a German village, Javanese village, you have a Turkish village, you had a Cairo street, Bedouin camp, and surprisingly, a Moorish palace. I'm going to get to that in a second. But these are the dancers. This is what they wore. This is how the belly dance has been predominantly portrayed. So-called belly dance that you call us today. Moorish palace. Wouldn't you expect it to have Northern African dancers? No, it has Irish and Scottish dancers as well. That's your colonial history for you. And you can still find these maps, you can still find depictions. In fact, I found a video, I hope it's here, and here we have it. Mind you, I think this is the world's first dance to be censored. In fact, the first film to be censored. You will see that soon. God forbid she knows her chest and her hips. How downright vulgar, right? Well, that was one of the dancers that was actually portrayed in the Midway Plaisance. But we had other such festivities. We had Little Egypt that was at Coney Island, and this is where much of our hoochie coochie references to belly dance comes from. And we do have another recording of that as well. There is one where she balances a chair on top of her head while she's dancing, which is fascinating, and I'm yet to figure out how. But either way, it is not just the belly. In fact, if you see, there's not much of the belly moving. It's mostly the hips and the chest and a little bit of hand movement. And this is it for today. Thank you. Now, if you would like, you can always contact me. My Instagram is here. And this is the link to all my presentations from anthropology, history, to all the way to neuroscience of sex. and you can always join. It's free, it's open to the public, it's no longer an academic session. This link will also lead you to the paper I wrote on belly dance. That particular paper talks about how feminization and sexualization is used as tools of colonial dominance, and that evidence could be seen in dances and music of post-colonial societies. So belly dance was used as a case study at that point.
Great, thank you so much. All right.
The QR code, yeah.
QR code's a little weird. All right, we have time for a couple of questions. Let's see. Test your dance knowledge. I mean, I feel like we've all become experts. Yes. So the question is, what drew your interest to this area of academics?
Well, I received my belly dance instruction when I was in college, and I was fascinated by the bifurcation between folk dance and the staged dance form. That was one area of exposure. The other area of exposure is that I have been studying as I'm a vocal artist, so my training has been in Indian Carnatic, and I have been studying sex work art forms of Devdasis and the wives in India, what we call as courtesans and temple sex workers today, but that's a wrong classification, might I add. But I've been studying their art and the history and politics of that for a long time, and it got to a stage wherein I could see parallels between this and Egypt. And Arabic is not my language, but I had to sit through a lot of news channels and debate topics that were specifically done in Arabic, and have my translator open to kind of understand what the regional conversation was all about. And it took about 2.5 years or so, and I finally figured out that maybe there is a lot more that was happening across Egypt, and that was the same colonial administration that was used across different colonies.
Great. All right. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Do you still find these folk dances being performed?
Do you still find the folk dances you mentioned performed throughout Egypt?
Yes and no. So there are some of them that are still being staged and performed. You will find local dance troupes that are still doing that. However, when you get to places like the Sinai Peninsula, which is predominantly filled with nomadic tribes, it is harder to find dances. In fact, some of them have gone extinct after the ethnographer had actually noted them down. And the last time he could actually see that dance was somewhere in 1990s or something. And after that, he could not see that again. So if you look at Egypt today, there are a lot of rules and regulations around dances. If you were to dance, you need a license to dance. Not only that, you should also prescribe to certain types of rules when it comes to dance etiquettes and clothing, that if you're wearing a skirt, you need to wear shorts underneath it. Even if your slit is high, you need to wear shorts. You need the shorts to be visible enough. And there are a lot of morality police going around in Egypt, checking if you're doing that or not. So that has limited the dances and its expression. In fact, a very recent case of a belly dance professor who was dancing on her rooftop received a cease and desist letter or something like that, and she was fired by her university for dancing. She's a belly dance professor in Egypt, and they launched a case against her. So there is a lot of politics behind this.
Wow, that is fascinating. Interesting. The politics of dancing. I would never have guessed. It is interesting to think about like extinct dances too, like the idea of. I guess this brings it all full circle because we were talking about language trees and stuff like that. It seemed like you presented basically the same sort of thing, but with dance, and the idea of like certain languages go extinct and certain dance forms go extinct. Is there like a concerted effort to try to capture and document dances before they go extinct?
Yes, but it's harder to do so now, because if they would have gone extinct by now, they would have gone extinct. And the folk dances that we have today, if it is bound by a community, if we have a strong patriarchal lineage or a strong patriarchal lineage of word of mouth transfer of dances, then there's a possibility of the tradition to survive. If it is codified within religion, within customs, within cultural, let's just say events like weddings and all of that, then the dance form has a higher chance of surviving. We have a dance form called Baladi, which is a form of different types of folk belly dances put together that is predominantly performed by women in weddings and inside houses, which has survived, which retains a lot of the elements of Ghawazee and the other dance forms as well. But should that avenue be closed, then we might see that going extinct again. Now, are you allowed to document it? Well, it depends who you are. If you're an outsider, you're not allowed to take photographs, leave alone document. If you are even an insider, unless and until you're part of the family, you will not be able to see the women. They'll be under a burqa or under a hijab. You will not be allowed to see them. In fact, you wouldn't be allowed to see the dance at all, unless you're a woman and who has connections to the family and who can enter the house, then you may be allowed to do so.
Very intense. I would never have thought of dance as being so protected, but I guess that makes sense as any other cultural practice or artifact. In a sense.
Yeah. It's all the part of visibility politics, right? We talk about who is seen, who is staged, who is platformed. But part of that visibility also goes into right to opacity,
Right.
that we don't really speak about these days. And many of the, especially across the global south, prefer that right to opacity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly I would love for the internet to forget about me. I would love that. That'd be amazing. All right. I think, all right. Honestly, I think we're over time. Okay. All right. One last round of applause for Nishita. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. The most